All right. Well, I mean, if you guys want to get started,
Okay.
I will.
So I'd like to welcome everybody to the November ACT Valley of the Sun chapter webinar. Today we are going to be discussing the future of clean energy and transportation, subject of high interest to a lot of us in the transportation and clean energy world. I'm Chris Barker, Vice President for the ACT Valley of the Sun board, and I'm also President CEO for CBC Transportation Consulting. I'm joined this morning by two fantastic industry colleagues. We have Karen Apple, who is the Electric Vehicle Program Manager from the City of Phoenix. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And we're also joined by Catherine O'Brien, who is the Electric Vehicle Lead for SRP's Sustainability Policy and Programs team. And welcome, Catherine, as well.
Thank you, Chris. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
So for today's discussion, we're going to kick it off with kind of a big picture look at what's happening in the world of clean energy and transportation. I'm then going to have Karen and Catherine zoom in a little tighter on what's going on in the greater Arizona market in this area. And then we'll have time for some questions. And we will encourage you, if you have questions, please pop them up in the chat window. And we'll do our best to try to get as many of those questions answered as we can within the hour for the webinar. So again, thank you all for joining. Just want to give a little bit of background. For those who I've not had a chance to meet, I've been in the transportation market for 25 plus years. Started off in the aerospace world. Used to live in Seattle, worked for Boeing. Started off in the space and defense side of the business, and then worked into the commercial aviation side. And so all things aviation, was heavily immersed in that activity. Later, went to work with Cisco and joined their smart city development team. So we were doing development projects around the world. We're building cities from the ground up to modernizing cities' infrastructure, whether it be their transportation systems, their power, their education, their all different aspects that make the cities thrive. 2011, moved here to Arizona, joined Honeywell. And at the time I joined, Honeywell was having its first biofuel flight across the Atlantic Ocean for the Paris Air Show, which was quite a historic moment. And really kicked off kind of a whole period of time with the company where we were doing a lot of advancements in clean energy and transportation and biofuel technology. Had an opportunity after to work as an advisor for the U.S. Smart Cities Challenge back in 2016, which was a fantastic experience of working with cities across the United States as they were developing innovative plans for transportation, clean energy, infrastructure, and so on. Just back in 2016, 2017, and 18, worked with a French transport company called Keolis. And one of my key projects was launching the first all-electric autonomous shuttle service in Las Vegas. The first shuttle to operate on open roads with mixed traffic, pedestrians, transit vehicles. So that was a fantastic experience. And we later brought similar service to Montreal and 5 other international markets. And today, I also am a managing partner for a very large green hydrogen fuel development project called Hive One here in Arizona, where we're developing clean energy to hopefully help support the parts of transportation that run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week across the United States. So I thought I'd share a brief story kind of close to home. We recently purchased a new vehicle. We were trying to decide between a gas-powered vehicle and an electric vehicle. And we did some research and looked at what's the average cost of fueling a car, a gas-powered vehicle, for a year. Found it's on the average, it varies depending upon state, but roughly $1,175 a year to fuel a gas-powered car. And so we're curious, how does that compare to an electric vehicle and what that might look like? And as we dug in and did some research, found that an electric vehicle for 3-year lease, for example, 12,500 miles a year, the charging fee for that for 3 years is $1,250. Slight disclaimer, we have solar in our house, so we were able to utilize our solar power for 7 cents a kilowatt for off-peak charging. So when we looked at the kind of side-by-side comparison of the two options, we were looking at basically a 40% less expensive option for an electric vehicle. And so happy to say we've got our first electric car. And as I've talked to colleagues across the industry, these same kind of discussions are happening when we're comparing and contrasting the rising cost of gas and the benefits of electric vehicles. And so it's pretty exciting to have an EV, learning a lot about it. And it's also, kind of informing a lot of the work we do in the industry. So I just want to kind of share that because I think that a lot of those discussions are percolating in homes around the United States as more electric vehicles become available and the pricing differences that are available for consumers. So will be interesting to see how this pace is going forward. For the purpose of today's conversation, we're really looking at the fact that, as many of you know, transportation accounts for 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. Obviously, a very big topic of discussion in Glasgow with the COP26 conference going on is how can all of us in the transportation industry work toward a zero emissions future? And what might that look like? And what are the paths ahead? So as we look at where we are today, and I'll kind of break this into 3 segments, starting with automotive. A lot of the discussions around electric vehicles from the auto manufacturers are focused on migrating their fleets to more electrified fleet options as we move toward 2030. So specifically, 45% of all new vehicles are expected to be electric by 2030. And that number jumps up to 80% by 2040, which is rather amazing when you think about just the volume of vehicles and the amount of development that's up ahead as we migrate to this zero emissions future. Not to be forgotten, on the fuel cell side, we're looking at 3.7 million fuel cell vehicles by 2030, and then another 13+ million worldwide. So looking at this from electrified and hydrogen fuel cell, there's a lot of development underway. And it's not just isolated to vehicles. The trucking, freight and logistics market is obviously heavily involved here as well. We're looking at 42% of class 4 to 8 commercial vehicles are going to be battery electric powered by 2040. And there's another 10 different class 8 semi trucks, that are being looked at for design for hydrogen propulsion, giving 400 to 700 miles of range as we move forward. And then another significant part of transportation, of course, is the aviation industry. There's been some interesting advancements in just the last year to 2 years. I had the first hydrogen flight from the UK this last year. Major manufacturers like Airbus are looking at upwards of 3 to 5 aircraft models that will be powered potentially on hydrogen. And up in the Northwest, where I used to live, there was the first electric over-the-water flight of de Havilland Beaver float plane from Victoria to Vancouver. So a lot happening across all 3 segments of transportation, which is quite exciting. Where we are today, from a big picture perspective, is there's a need for, and Karen and Catherine will talk about this in more detail for Arizona, but there's certainly a need for more charging station infrastructure as the OEMs continue to migrate to more electrified fleets. We're going to be looking at, today we have 75,000 charging stations in the US, and we're going to be looking at 2.4 million by 2030. And that number continues to go up and up and up. In California, on the hydrogen side, California is really the primary state where hydrogen fuel vehicles are being operated and fueled. Today, there's 49 stations in California, primarily in Southern and Central California, a little bit in the Bay Area. And the goal there is to expand to over 1,000 hydrogen fueling stations in the next many years. And then, of course, that will expand to other states as well. So a significant amount of growth and infrastructure required to support this transportation migration. A comment we hear a lot is our charging grid capable of supporting this migration to electrified transportation? And from a power generation point of view, to kind of put this in perspective, since 1950, there have been 2 periods in time where we, the United States, have generated about 100 terawatts of power in 2 cycles that took place 2 different decades. One was around the advent of appliances, more modernized appliances, and that drove quite a bit of power generation. But on the average, we're somewhere between 5 to 30 terawatts of power for use over the last 20 or so years. And when you think about where we're going as we move forward, we'll need about 12 gigawatts of power to support about 6 million light duty vehicles per year. And then when you look at kind of EV adoption as we go forward between 2035 and 2039, we're looking at another probably 15 gigawatts of power, and then another 8.5 gigawatts between 2045 and 2049. So we have the ability to generate a tremendous amount of power, but there are other challenges. And those challenges kind of lie in our distribution and our transmission of this power. Do we have the capacity to be able to support power in the right place, the right location for these different transportation needs? And our transmission systems are needing upgrade. Part of why we're hearing a lot of talk out of Washington, D.C. for this infrastructure bill is to how do we improve the grid, the transmission lines. There's also a big factor around ramping reserve requirements of bulk power so that we have enough adequate power stored for as EVs start to expand in their scope and scale. Another comment that's come out of places like California is medium and heavy duty vehicles. Those vehicles account for about 29% of fuel use today. As those vehicles migrate to either electrified or hydrogen powered, where are we at in our ability to support that increase in consumption requirement? So that's something that's being looked at. And then the other part, of course, is charging station infrastructure. This came up in the Smart City Challenge for a number of cities, is how do you ensure that you bring charging infrastructure to single family homes, multi-tenant properties, perhaps older structures that maybe aren't quite up to code, and how do you do that at scale? And so that's a big thing that a lot of folks within the energy and the transportation world are looking at to get their arms around and figure out how do we plan for this appropriately. To give you a sense of programs happening across the United States, for those of you in the Southwest, or the West, I should say, you're probably familiar with the Rev West program. This is a multi-state cooperative agreement to provide a framework for electric vehicle operations and charging infrastructure that spans across Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. I was in Indiana a few weeks ago, speaking to the Indiana Energy Association, and they've recently passed a similar version of Rev West for the Midwest, which is going to create a similar model. And then in other parts of the United States, the Northeast has a program toward developing a cooperative program for zero emissions to help incentivize the adoption of zero emissions vehicles, and to also build out the infrastructure required for charging as well. Similar programs are underway in Pennsylvania and Ohio. So it's quite encouraging to see that different parts of the United States are joining forces across states to bring these capabilities to market. To give you a sense of, you may have been hearing the news or reading the news about the infrastructure bill that is imminently about to be passed or signed by the president. This is what many people call a generational change of investment in transportation, over $1 trillion. How this breaks out is quite significant. When you look at these numbers across the investment in roads and bridges, in rail, obviously significant investment in broadband. The bottom column or bottom row is also, I think, quite encouraging for what we're trying to accomplish as far as a zero emissions future. Is $28 billion toward electric grid modernization to address some of the things I mentioned a moment ago. A big push on low carbon hydrogen fuel development projects, and also a strong push on electric vehicle charging infrastructure and being able to support this growth at a state and a local level across the United States. So as we look at the road ahead, we've had a lot of what we'll call limited or EV pilot programs, and the big goal is to push those to scale. Of course, a lot of that's going to be predicated on deployments and data sharing amongst city, state, and federal government, and how we share the information of what's working and how can that be replicated for other markets. A lot of focus, obviously, on grid modernization and improving our roads to have safer and more effective transportation options. As I mentioned, Karen and Kath will talk about a little bit about the charging infrastructure, but that's a huge piece, is ensuring that we've got the right charging infrastructure in place. And then we're also being cognizant of consumer and business habits. As people start to shift, like I talked about at the beginning, we've driven fossil fuel powered vehicles. Maybe there's a time for a change. Economics and other things are playing a factor in that. And so keeping tabs on that and making sure we're evolving. And then the other piece, of course, is the financing and revenue model. Much of our transportation system has historically been financed on the gas tax. And now we're looking at need to look at a new model that says, how do we fund transportation that covers all types of vehicles, whether it be gas powered, diesel, electric, hydrogen, so that we have a revenue capture model that is more consistent and able to support the infrastructure needs going forward. So just wanted to share that as a top line overview, and we'll take some questions after we go through our individual discussions. And with that, I would like to hand over to Karen Apple, who's going to talk a little bit about what's happening with the city of Phoenix.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Let me get the slides pulled up here. It's always a challenge for me is to share my screen.
Well, if you're like me and have 5,000 other windows open, it's always hard to find the right one.
Well, there's that. So
It's
Chris,
that nice bright green share screen button at the bottom of your screen there. Should be able to.
yeah, let me, Chris, do you have my PowerPoint? I can just have you run it as well, or my PDF.
I do. Or Elizabeth, you have it right handy?
Yeah, do you want me to do that?
If you wouldn't mind,
if you
Elizabeth,
don't
that'd be
mind.
awesome. That
Okay,
that
sure.
way I can kind of monitor questions for
Let me
second
stop
part.
share.
That'd be great.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah.
You think I'd have it down, but we're into year plus on this.
There's all
Thank you,
kinds of
Elizabeth.
things that we're still working out, so it's all good.
Yeah, thank you so much. So yes, my name is Karen Apple. I'm with the.
It's easy to see if you qualify. Just call
Uh-oh.
800-761.
Okay, we're okay.
We can hear you.
Okay, so yes, my name is Karen Apple. I'm with the City of Phoenix, and I'm the EV Program Manager. And my background, a lot of my background's in aviation and aviation consulting and environmental processing work. But I had the opportunity to apply for this position. It's a new position with the city back in March of 2020. And I've been enjoying this space. I've been meeting lots of new people, learning lots of new things, and helping the city of Phoenix advance their EV program. So next slide, Elizabeth. So a couple of things I'm going to talk about today are the problems that we're solving for, how City of Phoenix has taken action, some of the city's EV goals, our leaders and partners, EV program stats, and then what are we looking to do in the future? Next slide, please. So for those that live in the Phoenix area and the Valley are quite aware of our air quality issues. We certainly experience a lot of unhealthy air quality days. So for those that don't live here, we are on a top 10 list that I would rather not be on for the city of Phoenix. City of Phoenix ranks number 5 for the most polluted air. And again, that's not a top 10 list that I would like to remain on. As Chris said, exhaust from cars and diesel vehicles are the major source of our air pollution. And the American Lung Association has put out this information. And that's one of the main reasons that we, the city, are looking into EVs is how can we mitigate some of our air quality challenges in the Valley. Next slide, please. And again, to allude to Chris's comments, 47% of the city's greenhouse gas emissions come from the transportation sector. Again, 51% comes from stationary energy and about 2% comes from waste. Next slide. So recently, as of, I believe it was in October, the city got approval for our climate action plan. So we're very excited about this. And the major chief goal of the climate action plan is to be carbon neutral by 2050. Now, included in our climate action plan are some EV specific goals. And again, this is our first take at establishing our EV goals. We know that we're going to have to use some metrics to understand our successes and how we can reevaluate our EV goals on probably a yearly basis. Next slide, please. So some of these EV goals include rapidly accelerating our EV adoption and expanding our public charging. So as Chris alluded to, we, the City of Phoenix, are committed to EV adoption. And one of the challenges we face is the deployment of EV chargers within our city boundaries. I'm faced with 3 different entities that I have to try and strategize on how to get EV deployment, EV charging deployment. I have the public, of course, as our chief focus. Second focus is our employees. Second focus is actually fleet. Third is our employees. And then our another focus is helping businesses and other companies within the City of Phoenix have opportunities for EV charging. And we have mirrored President Biden's goal of 50% of annual new car sales to be EVs by 2030. Next goal is we want to look at increasing our EV charging in single family, multifamily, and commercial properties. We understand that there's a real barrier to multifamily properties for EV charging. So we want to look at incentives, building code development, and application and adoption. So we'll be looking at those probably in 2023 to adopt some EV ready building codes. Another EV goal for the city is to develop community outreach and EV roadmap action plans. This, I certainly understand that the cornerstone to EV advancement and adoption is education and awareness. I've talked to many of our residents, many of our employees, and unfortunately, we've got a huge education opportunity in front of us to help inform and educate our residents and employees. For instance, a lot of people I'm finding don't realize that they don't need a special piece of equipment to be able to charge in their garage if they're a single family owner. So again, helping get some of these education facts out there and helping our informing and educating our residents and employees in our businesses. Next goal that we are looking at is implementing equity principles into our EV policies and programs. This is a huge commitment for the City of Phoenix to put the equity lens on where we're placing and deploying our EV chargers. We want to make sure that we are equitable and fair and have access and affordability to all of our residents. Next slide, please. Another goal that we have identified in our climate action plan is to increase EV charging on city property. We have a target goal to install 500 EV charging stations on city property by 2030. And in a minute, I'm going to show you where we stand today and how we're going to try to achieve to get to 500. Next goal is to electrify the city fleet where feasible. We have a target goal of replacing 200 light duty internal combustion fleet sedans by 2030 and to be 100% light duty sedan fleet by 2040. So our first target is to really look at our light duty, it's not necessarily sedans, but light duty vehicles, which includes pickups, sedans, compacts in our fleets. And we have over 3,000 vehicles that we're going to have to look to transition. So, and again, along with electrifying the fleet is putting chargers in for those where the fleets are going to be located at. So again, it's not just purchasing the vehicle, it's also strategizing on the deployment of the EV fleet chargers. And the next goal is installing EV chargers for non-road equipment at the City Aviation Department. So working with the Aviation Department today, they're doing a mini study on where they need chargers for the public, for their employees, and for some of their tenants of the airport. So we are also looking at behind the fence. So considering airside, how can we electrify some of those tugs or carts or anything that's used by our airline tenants or rental car facilities to electrify their fleets as well. Next slide, please. So to show our commitment to advancing EV programs and policies, our Mayor, Mary Gallego, and one of our city councilwomen, Councilwoman Ansari, have started a new EV ad hoc committee, and this kicked off in August. And it's comprised of about 13 local, most of them are local, industry EV professionals and folks that have an equity focus to help the city understand what kinds of policies and procedures and incentives and rebates and programs that we can administer for our public and our employees and for our fleet programs. So we have established 3 subcommittees. The first one is education, outreach, and equity. Second subcommittee is focuses on public, workplace, business, and home charging. And the third subcommittee focuses on city fleet and city charging to include charging for our city employees. Next slide, please. And I'd be remiss if I certainly didn't say a few words about our partnerships, because without our partners, we certainly wouldn't be as far down the road as we are today. So the City of Phoenix has partnered with Arizona State University on their Sustainability Cities Network, and I am the co-chair on the EV work group. So I look at this role from the city's perspective as I have the fortunate ability to be a dedicated EV advocate working for the City of Phoenix. And there's a lot of municipalities around the valley that don't have that opportunity. So I feel like my role helps be the conduit to get some of the EV information out to my fellow sustainability and fleet managers that don't have the opportunity to sit in this space every day. So it's an opportunity to be a central repository to help the valley move the needle in advancements on EV electrification or EV adoption. So next partner is our Salt River Project, one of our utility partners. City of Phoenix is a founding member of the Transportation Electrification Activator Work Group. And on another note, we recently took advantage of SRP's offer where they increased some rebate for EV charger installation projects. So we, the city, were able to, in partnership with SRP, deploy an additional 22 level 2 ports on city-owned properties. It took us 9 months, and we couldn't have done it without SRP's commitment and funding assistance. Last partner that we certainly are proud of having a partnership with is our APS, our other utility within the valley, and we are on their EV collaborative, and we're a member of that as well. So the City of Phoenix is actually located in 2 utility service territories, SRP and APS. So leveraging our partnerships and programs just help us. With APS, we're taking advantage of some Take Charge EV charger installation programs, which will provide another about 16 level 2 chargers for our fleet and our employees. So looking forward to getting those installed for the city as well. Next slide, please. So where is the city at today in terms of our EV stats? We are kind of on the forefront. We're in the planning phases for fleet transitions and EV charger deployments. Lots of planning to do in those 2 realms. We've got 13 electric vehicles in our fleet today. 9 sedans and 4 electric motorcycles that are used by our non-pursuit police force. We have 62 public EV charging stations, We have 11 fleet EV charging stations, and we have 73 workplace charging stations, which is a mix of level 2s and leveraging level 1s. So again, certainly lots more to do, but we have at least started the transition. Next slide, please. So where do we go next and how do we get there? So let me go over a little bit about what our plans are for the future. Next slide, please. So this is a market transformation curve. And if you focus on the star, that is where the EV transition market is today. And what we want to do is rapidly go up that orange colored line. And the way that we can do that is with direct subsidies and tax credits and exemptions and non-monetary incentives such as HOV lane, access, and emissions exemptions. So the city are certainly excited about the House passing the infrastructure bill this week and look forward to President Biden signing it and learning and understanding how the city can use the funding that's coming towards coming our way to have more EV charging deployment. So again, we need to do things that rapidly get us up this curve. Next slide, please. And we're excited that today there's about between 55 and 80 EV models on the market. And as you can see by this chart, we hope that by 2025, there's an additional 80-ish models that we can choose from light duty sedans to pickup trucks to SUVs to compacts. And we know right now that there's a bit of a deficit on the car dealership lots from vehicles. So we're looking forward to having more models for our residents and our fleet to have more access to different kinds of vehicles to choose from. Next slide, please. And so where's Phoenix sit in this landscape of our residents in terms of ownership and registrations of EVs, and how many chargers do we need to have installed to meet the demand? So right now, in 2020, our ADOT statistics showed us that we have over 8,500 EVs registered in the city of Phoenix. By 2030, based on a 30% growth, compounded annual growth rate, we're looking at having over 230,000 EVs in our city boundaries. And what that equates to is the need for a heck of a lot more chargers than what we have installed today. So right now we've got 62. We have 218 within the city that the market and the city in conjunction have installed, 62 of which are on city-owned property. But based on the Department of Energy's Alternative Fuels Data Center EV Light tool that can help you understand how many chargers an entity needs to install based on their forecast, EV forecast, it says that we need over 3,000 level 2 chargers by 2030. And that's just not City of Phoenix, that's City of Phoenix coupled with our market and business providers. So that's not only on the shoulders of the city, but having the marketplace fill some of that gap as well. And it also said that we need 359 DC fast chargers. So a lot of chargers to install, a lot of things to understand before we can get there. Catherine's going to talk about grid and capacity, but we're going to certainly continue to partner with our utilities on how we can have access to the electrical needs that are going to be required to install these EV chargers. Next slide, please. So that's all I have for today, and I'm more than happy to take questions at the end, but there's my contact information. Don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions, and I'm more than happy to answer.
Thank you, Karen. Great information. And yes, please, if you have questions as we go through today, feel free to pop them into the chat window, and we're going to try to address as many of those as we can toward the back part of our session. With that, I'd like to introduce Catherine O'Brien from SRP, who's going to give us the utility perspective on this subject. Catherine, it's all yours.
All right. Well, hopefully everyone can see my screen, and thank you all for having me here today. And I think Chris and Karen really just kind of showed really what the market is looking like today, what's happening in not only just City of Phoenix, but all of Arizona and all the municipalities and businesses and what they're trying to do. And really, I'm here to just provide you our utilities perspective in how we're trying to help in that transformation of EV adoption for all of our customers, whether they're on a commercial or residential basis. And one of the things I do want to point out, in case you're not aware, SRP is a non-for-profit organization here in the Phoenix Valley metro area. We do both water and power. And really what we're trying to focus on is being able to provide these essential resources. And we've been doing it for over a century, but really helping to meet the needs of our customers and help the region grow. So some of the things I hope for you to take away from today is understanding what SRP's 2035 sustainability and EV goals are, what our EV strategies and initiatives we have put in place today to just help us in reaching our 2035 goals, and to highlight some of the community partnerships, which Karen has already talked about, just a few to get us going and answering other questions. But back in 2019, SRP went through a stakeholder process to help us identify what our 2035 sustainability goals. And they actually ended up coming up with a list of 20 different initiatives that touch on 5 key SRP business areas, as you can see across the screen. These goals were really developed in partnership with these stakeholders and a variety of organizations to look at how SRP can make decisions to balance the cost and impacts while we provide reliable, sustainable water and power, since that is our core business at SRP. And when we look at transportation electrification, that fell under the customer and grid enablement piece or sector of our business. And what we wanted to do is provide zero impediments for our customers that implemented new programs and technology for their end use, such as electric vehicle adoption and EV charging. So what is our goal? When we look at our goal related to transportation electrification, our objective is to support the enablement of 500,000 EVs in our service territory while managing 90% of that charging load. And we did this because our stakeholders strongly supported a long-term goal dedicated to electric transportation for the benefits that it would provide our customers and community. And Chris and Karen talked about it, especially when it comes to emissions reductions and air quality improvements. And we paired this goal with our emissions reductions from our generation fleet. We found by enabling 500,000 electric vehicles in our service territory, that would reduce 1.6 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions. And so that was really a strong suit on, or a strong point of why we chose this as our goal. And really to help accomplish these goals, SRP worked extensively to develop an EV roadmap or transportation electrification roadmap with focused strategies and programs that would tackle those well-known barriers to EV adoption and increase our overall understanding of the technology. And I'll go over those here shortly. When we look at our EV strategy, we wanted to make sure we were on the right track to meet our goals, since supporting EVs is good for our customers and for SRP. And we wanted to focus in areas where SRP had the most meaningful impact. SRP is not in the business of selling cars, so that was not where our strategy and initiatives focused on as example. What we did is we wanted to focus where we could help shape our EV future, that really identified opportunities in these areas to increase EV adoption while setting strategic priorities for each EV sector. And they really focused on supporting the different policies education awareness, and innovation around single-family homes, commercial and multifamily dwellings, public charging, and fleet electrification. And we understood that there was no single solution to increasing EV adoption, and that therefore we needed to offer a diverse portfolio of EV offerings while measuring the effectiveness of these offerings to meet our goal and to help our customers meet their goals as well. And we wanted to make sure we were prudent, SRP was prudent in their approach to supporting the transition to this technology. To help SRP reach our 500,000 enablement goal, we came up with this suite of commercial and residential programs that customers can choose from. And one thing to note that these programs I'm highlighting just represent a small sample, but they're very significant to our near and long-term efforts. So when we look at our commercial programs, Karen talked about it, we are offering our commercial customers a $1,500 per level 2 network port that's installed, up to 50 ports per customer. And for our municipalities, nonprofit schools, and new this year, our multifamily dwelling customers, we're also providing them an additional 2,500 make ready rebate to help cover some of that infrastructure costs that go in there, that go into implementing this charging infrastructure. Also through SRP's Energy Star Home Rebate Program or Energy Star program, we are offering a $300 per home rebate to home builders to pre-wire new homes for residential EV charging in the future. We know that putting in the infrastructure before instead of retrofitting is more cost effective. And also, we have created a fleet electrification service. And this is where it's a new customer program where customers who work with qualified service providers can get up to $20,000 to evaluate the feasibility of converting their fleet or equipment over to electric. So that could be a huge savings to our customers. And overall, these efforts in the commercial customer space really is helping to accelerate the benefits of EV adoption by increasing the number of chargers and reducing emissions from these high-use vehicles in the Valley. Last year alone, and when I say last year, it's our fiscal year, which runs May 1st through April 30th, we were able to install 410 level 2 charging ports through the business charging station rebate and make ready rebate as well. So now we're going to switch over to our residential programs, and this really just helps helps our commercial customers, but it helps them with their employees and our communities and the residents of SRP service territory. Our first I'd like to highlight is our EV community. This has been running since around 2015, and it's a way for SRP to really understand what our customers who have electric vehicles in our service territory, what their needs are, and they provide us valuable feedback that helps shape EV future programs for SRP, identify rate plans, and charging solutions that pave the way for other future EV owners. And so for every customer in SRP's territory that has an EV, they can register for this program and earn a $50 bill credit. We also have an EV price plan that is a time of use rate where SRP provides this time of use rate plan for residential customers so that they can save during these super off-peak times of 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. We also have an EV savings calculator, which is a tool that enables customers to really find the right EV for them, compare models between whether it's comparing between electric vehicles or it's comparing it between an electric vehicle or a comparable internal combustion engine vehicle, and understand how switching to an EV can help them save over a 5-year period. And then lastly, we have an EV charging station rebate for residential customers. This is through SRP's marketplace, where customers can get an instant $250 rebate towards the purchase of a smart home charging station. And again, on the other side of our goal is managing 90% of EV charging. And this is put into two different buckets, passive and active. And for the passive managed charging, it touches base on what customers' behavior and changing that customer behavior. And what we found through our EV community members and surveying them, 75% of existing EV customers are in some sort of time of use price plan. And we see that they either program their cars, program their residential charging station if they have it, or plug in, as Karen said, just into a 120 volt outlet during those off-peak times. They are very conscious about when they charge. Our biggest challenge right now is understanding how to maintain this percentage, the 75%, and move it up to that 90% for managed charging. On the other side is understanding how to create these active managed charging approaches, which are like demand response. And this is where SRP would have more of that communication and control of charging behavior and that load associated with it. And so we have deployed two research projects this year that are looking at different types of technology to help with not only home energy efficiency, but minimizing charging load during those peak times. And some of the things I just want to wrap up our conversation with are some of the community partnerships. Like Karen said, we could not make this possible without that. And she had touched upon about City of Phoenix being the founding member of a TE activator. It's made up of 9 organizations, as you can see on the screen. And this is a coalition of practitioners and supporters really focused on accelerating transportation electrification in Arizona, and 8 different members joined SRP in this effort, like I said. And really, we want to do this through collaborative action that really gets things done. Instead of talking about it, we want to go out and just do it. And we want to do it in a way that optimizes community benefits and maximizes investment effectiveness and really promotes the electrification transition as fast as possible. And to date, members have all shared their action plans in this space so that we can start aligning and identifying different projects and programs that we can move forward with. And one of the biggest things that we have really all agreed upon is education and awareness, like Karen said earlier, is one of the big things to do. Lastly, on the other side is our ASU strategic partnership, where we are working with ASU in different areas. And in the transportation area, we're focusing on policy and pricing strategies, education and awareness, infrastructure and charging locations, behaviors and choices, where we can take the subject matter experts from both sides here and really come together, leverage that, and move forward. And just for the interest of time, I'm just going to briefly touch on, we're doing a dealership education with ChargeWay, which has been great. We've got 6 of their kiosks in their showrooms that sales staff has used to really help customers understand what owning and operating and charging an EV looks like. And they've had some great success with that. And also some public charging partnerships with EVgo Electrify America, for example, to really help bridge that gap and get public charging out in the communities. Again, we're really committed with working with more people. Partnerships really make this happen, and wanting to increase EV adoption here in not only our service territory, but in the region, through the state, and really helping our customers meet their electrification goals as well. So with that, Chris, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Catherine. And I love your comment about get things done, because that seems to be a theme of a lot of questions that we've had come in. And a question for you and for Karen. When you look at the EV projects that you've deployed, what would you say are the big lessons learned? And then the second part of this is, can you give some advice for others on this call about funding options for EV charging infrastructure stations and the best pathway forward for deploying these more at scale? and Catherine, I don't know if you want to take that first and then Karen chime in.
Yeah, I'll say really lessons learned. If this is something that you want to do, especially as a business, start talking with your utility right away. Because we have members or we'll say those we partner with that can help you along that electrification journey, that can help you tell you what are the best steps, the next best steps to doing something. As I said, getting that infrastructure in ahead of time versus retrofitting is much more cost effective. And so lessons learned that we have heard from many of our customers, oh, wow, I wish we would have done this first or talk to you first. So please don't hesitate to reach out to your utility to find out what kind of programs they have or what direction that they could help offer on getting you with that process. When it comes to funding opportunities, SRP and APS, we do offer different types of rebates, and I highlighted some of the programs that we offer for both the commercial and residential customers. But also don't forget to take advantage of and look into the different types of federal tax credits, incentives that are out there, and see if there's any additional local state incentives there. There's the 30C and 30D tax credits. The 30C is for charging. This is the way I got 30C is charging, D is for deployment of vehicles. So C, they are offering, and they just now passed it, is that it's 30% of your infrastructure costs can be rebated. And it used to be up to $30,000, and now it's going to get maxed out to $200,000. And so then there's also the 30D, which can help with fleet conversion. So those are just a few of the different types of tax credits, and there's different grant programs out there too that can help with offsetting that cost. Karen, I was going to say, Karen, is there any thoughts on you have on lessons learned?
Yes, absolutely. So a couple lessons learned. When we deployed the 22 level 2 chargers with SRP's partnership, I didn't realize how expensive it was to install EV charging stations. So a really good education for me and getting an understanding of what your facility, the electrical upgrades or needs that's going to be required to accommodate your charging stations. Sometimes it's a 40 amp breaker. Sometimes you have to update the entire panel. Sometimes you have to update and get a transformer or a step down transformer. So lesson learned is really understand what your facility can accommodate and understand what your charging needs are going to be and match those up with your electrical cabinets. Also, another lesson learned is along the lines of Catherine is look for some no cost free planning help that's out there, such as the Electrification Coalition offers a free EV transition model that is it's funded by the Bloomberg Philanthropies. So check out some of these other resources such as Electrification Coalition, Atlas EV Hub has some really good information. Forth, FORTH, up in the Portland area does a great job and has lots of resources that are available. And I have myself written down different costs. And understanding the true cost of installation. So there's permitting cost, there's planning cost, there's and then operational and maintenance cost of your chargers. So whenever you're doing your budget, don't just look at the cost of the charger. It's the whole project cost. And if you install smart chargers, I like to call those the gift that keeps giving, because you have to pay subscription or networking fees. So don't forget to budget those things in there as well, because they will come up and bite you if you haven't budgeted for them. So
that's perfect, Karen. Thank you. And a follow-up question, Catherine, you talked about the importance for getting out in front of EV infrastructure planning for new construction. But obviously folks live in cities around the United States with existing residential homes, multi-tenant dwellings. What's your advice for existing structures and how to bring EV options to those types of residences or office buildings or things of that nature?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I think that's where getting with an electrification consultant could be helpful because they can understand get a better understanding of what your objectives are and what needs are. There are plenty level 1 charging opportunities, and that's where you don't necessarily need a piece of equipment. That is just level 1 is where there is like an extension cord that comes from your vehicle and it plugs into a 120 volt outlet. And that could be an easy solution, especially in those areas where there's going to be long dwell time, long sit times for those electric vehicles. So it's really finding a good consultant to help you understand really what your needs are. If it's going to be like a Starbucks and they want to add in some new EV charging and they want their customers to get up and go, DC fast charging would be the best thing for them. But like Karen said, there is costs associated. So you really just have to find out and work with someone that can truly understand what your needs are to help you understand what the different options that are available to fit those needs.
Very good. We unfortunately have more questions than time allotted. So we'll do our best. If you have questions for Karen or Catherine or myself, we're happy to chat offline in answering any of those. And we greatly appreciate Karen and Catherine you joining our discussion today. And also, just as a reminder, we have our next Valley of the Sun webinar coming up the first week of December. We're going to be hosting futurist Mike Courtney as he talks about big tech and big biz developments that will shape the future of transportation in 2022. So look for a follow-up invite for that session. And for everybody who joined today, thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to continuing the dialogue offline. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.